We've told you before that the peace process talks about the Arab-Israeli issue that John Kerry's been spearheading, they're not going so well. In fact, some are saying that they are more or less dead on arrival. In fact, over before they even really got started. But just for good measure, I suppose, John Kerry's decided to continue to weigh in on the issue. He hasn't given up yet, and that's led to him saying something that got him into a little bit of trouble. At the Trilateral Commission on Friday, John Kerry said this: a two-state solution will be clearly underscored as the only real alternative, because a unitary state, talking about the state of Israel, winds up either being an apartheid state with second-class citizens, or it ends up being a state that destroys the capacity of Israel to be a Jewish state. Now, there's a lot in there that you may take issue with. What most people are pointing out is something to take tremendous issue with is the usage of apartheid rhetoric from the U.S. Secretary of State to this group of leaders and government and private sector leaders at the Trilateral Commission. So over the weekend, of course, this spiraled out, and the administration decided that they were going to try to do some damage control. We have Jen Psaki, my second favorite State Department spokeswoman, coming out and saying that the Daily Kos previously wrote about other leaders referencing apartheid, but not mentioned in this story. It's interesting. She's going to basically saying the Daily Kos said it, so what's the problem? A bit of a left-wing site, if one ever existed. And then she went on again and said, and Justice Minister and Chief Negotiator Livni also referenced it before. This time she's referencing Think Progress, another left of center. We just like to point these things out. Left of center website. Now, others said that this is completely unacceptable, that John Kerry, in fact, has to come out and apologize. Eric Cantor, Senate Minority Leader, has come out and said exactly that. Still waiting as we talk to you now for a phone call from John Kerry. Hasn't happened. And Patrick Meehan came out and tweeted that Secretary Kerry's use of the term apartheid to describe Israel isn't just false, it's a grave insult to one of our most important allies. Now you know what the back and forth is on that issue. Let me bring in an expert so we can actually look at what this all means. First, why the apartheid rhetoric is so offensive and what it means for the peace process as it's rolling out. I'm joined now by Dovid Efune, who's the editor-in-chief of Algemeiner. Dovid, good to see you.
Pleasure to be here, as always.
So Tony Blinken, who's a deputy national security advisor, he was on Face the Nation Sunday, and this is what he had to say.
Any Palestinian government has to recognize Israel, it has to renounce violence, it has to accept past agreements. That's the basis upon which we would work with such a government, and it's reasonable to expect Israel to work with such a government on that basis as well.
Now, that's not obviously the tone that John Kerry took in this Trilateral Commission meeting. He also talked about how there could be a resurgence of violence from the Palestinians against the Israelis unless peace process talks went forward, unless there was some kind of a deal on the table. Which one of these do you think is the true face of the Obama administration? Is it the John Kerry version at the Trilateral Commission, or is it Tony Blinken giving a more sort of nuanced version on the Sunday talk shows?
Well, look, Kerry, there is absolutely no question that Kerry's comments are part of a wider tone and trend that we've seen coming from the administration. And similar comments were made by the president himself in a recent interview with Jeffrey Goldberg at Bloomberg View. He thinks the way that they are talking to Israel is as if they're Don Corleone here. It's a Mafia style. It's like, we would hate for something terrible to happen to that nice little Jewish state you've got going on there. It's like, look, this is how we think things should go, but if they don't, you're going to get violence, you're going to be accused of apartheid, you're going to get diplomatic isolation, which of course creates a unreal situation where there is a threat that doesn't really exist. It's an artificial threat that's being created by the administration to push the Israelis into a point where they have to make concessions.
But isn't this part of John Kerry's just personal attachment to this? He's so invested into this whole thing that he continues to put his foot in his mouth because it almost seems as though he's been floating on his own little foreign policy island since he took over as Secretary of State, and there's just such a disconnect between him and the rest of the administration on how to approach Israel. But isn't this just more of the consistent damaging relationship we've had with Israel from day one, from the time that President Obama left Netanyahu sitting in the White House while he was having dinner? I mean, it's consistent with their disrespect of Israel.
It's consistent in the sense that, you know, it's unlikely that anybody's views have changed. The administration has taken certain steps to appear to be more representative of a broader spectrum of ideas. However, in instances like this, we see the true face coming through. And it is quite clear, based on these comments, based on these statements, that nothing has really changed in terms of their core positions, in terms of who they believe is right, who they believe is wrong, who they believe is at fault, and who they're going to hold their feet to the fire, as it were.
John Kerry said this on the eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day, also at the 20-year anniversary of the end of apartheid. People are saying this just shows the level of how tone-deaf the administration is on some of the on the peace process issue specifically. But he claimed it's not dead. I want to give you his most recent words. This is from the Daily Beast. The reports of the demise of the peace process have consistently been misunderstood and misreported, and even we are now getting to the moment of obvious confrontation and hiatus. But I would far from declare it dead. You would think this thing is going to hell in a handbasket, and who knows, it might at some point. But I don't think it is right now yet. Do you think this thing actually is already, to use John Kerry's words, hell in a handbasket from the administration point of view, or do you think they can resurrect this?
Look, my position, has always been that it wasn't alive to begin with. That there wasn't a living, breathing being here. Here you have a situation where the Palestinian Authority is jumping into bed with a designated terrorist group that was responsible for butchering thousands of Israelis. How is it possible that a peace process can take place under these circumstances? Israel can't even think along these terms. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And then to come out and say that, to start making these subtle threats, if you don't do it, then this and this will happen.
And whining about settlements the whole time as well.
Right.
Kerry likes to whine about
settlements. So this is
settlements.
not the way to get Israel to respond. Israel is a democratic country. They're elected officials. They're responsible for the security of their citizens first and foremost. And to say, that the U.S. is going to squeeze you in a position where you have to make concessions, countless Israeli leaders have said, we don't negotiate with a gun to our head.
Well, let me ask you about Jen Psaki's response, because in it she tweets some Israeli politicians. Buck mentioned Levini as saying they've used these terms before. Do you think pointing to Israeli politicians is a fair defense for using the term?
Apartheid.
For using the term apartheid, yes.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. For a number of reasons. First of all, two wrongs don't make a right. Everybody knows that. Second of all, what was the context? When was it said? Who said it? Here you're talking about a Secretary of State, a sitting Secretary of State, who is in a position to drive the outcome of affairs. These are not politicians in one position or another. That's first of all. And what's really most troubling and damaging specifically about the use of the term apartheid is that it's a term that's brandied about by some really, really bad people. People, generally, the end game, if you follow that thought all the way through, it is a position that says that there is no Jewish right to self-determination and that there cannot be a situation where Jews have a state of their own. So what Kerry has effectively done is aligned himself with people who are bigots, who are racist, who are anti-Semitic, by using a similar term, in his reference to the situation there in Israel.
Dovid, you said this tips their hand. This shows exactly what they think, who they think the good guys and bad guys are, which side is the right side, which side is the wrong side, and aligns himself with some others who have a specific end game. So you've seen these cards. What do you think the Obama administration wants? What are their true feelings? Tell us exactly what you think they expect is going to happen between Israel and Palestine.
Well, look, the Obama administration, and I think, frankly, the Israelis themselves would like to have a situation where they can agree on the scenario on the ground. The big question is, what is the way that can happen? And the concept of creating a state with the Palestinian Authority, which is in bed with Hamas, essentially creating a terror state on Israel's borders, is not something that Israel can go for. However, the administration is happy to go ahead with that.
That seems to be an essential point, and Prime Minister Netanyahu on Sunday said to Face the Nation essentially that, which is that President Abbas needs to distance himself from Hamas, or else this thing is, again, over before it even started. Listen.
He cannot speak out of both sides of his mouth. He cannot embrace Hamas and say that he wants peace with Israel. In fact, what I say to him very simply is this: President Abbas, tear up your pact with Hamas, recognize a Jewish state, make peace.
Is it fair to say that the Obama administration's efforts through John Kerry to kickstart or get going with the peace process here it's already going to be difficult based upon the reality on the ground, but they're making a bad situation worse, it would seem to me. It's already tough when you've got the Palestinian Authority and Hamas looking like they're going to reconcile here, but they're not helping the situation. Is that a fair place to point at this point?
Absolutely. I think this has kind of been an ongoing scenario where administrations feel like they have more leverage with the Israelis, and therefore they apply most of the pressure and most of the leverage with the Israelis. But, time and time again, if you talk about the Olmert deal, if you talk about the Barak deal, if you talk about what's happening now, the Palestinians very, very clearly are not looking for an agreement within this context and within this framework.
And I also think this drastically changes the conversation, because now they sort of have a reason to not continue with these, further adding to it. But the thing with apartheid is, one, that it's a completely inaccurate term to even be using, and then also the fact that it is coming from the Secretary of State. And I think you have a certain, because like you said, it's typically a term that's used by people. No one would ever say an apartheid state should exist. It's typically a term that people use so they can say that that nation shouldn't exist, because no one thinks South Africa should exist as an apartheid state when it did. And now it can be used as that by the other side to say that the United States essentially agrees with that argument.
Yeah, well, Senator Ted Cruz has asked for John Kerry to resign, not just the Eric Cantor
To
request
John
for
Kerry's
apology.
defense,
So
he probably figures his sloppiness has worked out so far.
That's true.
Got him out of a war in Syria.
there we go. There we go. Maybe this sloppiness will end differently. But Dovid, thank you very much for joining us. It's always good to see you. Tea Party organizations have raked in millions of dollars in contributions over the past several election cycles. But today, how is that money being spent? It's drawing some scrutiny. We'll get to the bottom of it in tonight's Q&A.